professional standards that many people apply when it comes to talking about topics like AIDS or cancer, heart disease, obesity, to me are appalling. I believe that we have been given poor information about what causes disease and the best ways of treating them. On the Progressive Commentary Hour, which we're doing now, we try to explore with a panel of experts what are the real underlying causes of these underlying causes. Today, we will end up going through a topic that gets scant attention in the media, certainly not from individuals who are sharing a challenging position. The topic is AIDS. My guest today on the panel will be Celia Farber. She's a journalist who's covered the HIV wars extensively since 1987 in various magazines. Some of these writings are collected in her book, Serious Adverse Events, An Uncensored History of AIDS. Activist Michael Callan called Farber the best AIDS journalist in the world. She also has enemies, and we're going to talk about that. What happens when you have the courage to tell the truth, even though that truth runs straight against the official version of a disease? What is the blowback? How do they attack you? How do they discredit you? How do they disempower the rest of the community from wanting to pay attention to you? She'll tell us that, because that's exactly what happened to her. In 2006, there was an article in Harper's Magazine detailing the totalitarian corruption of HIV/AIDS research entitled Out of Control, AIDS and the Corruption of Medical Science. The attack from the AIDS industries was predictable and fierce. Nonetheless, she won the 2008 Simon Weiss Clean Hands Award for Outstanding Investigative Journalism. Celia is the host of a brand new program entitled Radio Free Science, where we're inviting together with her all of the leading real scientists who are talking out, telling the truth. Joining her today will be Liam Schaaf. Liam is an investigative journalist, a researcher, addressing scientific discoveries, the medical cult, and the politics of science, especially concerning infectious disease, vaccines, and prescription drugs. He has been an activist for children and adolescent rights and broke the story about the government agency, particularly the National Institutes of Health and Big Pharma's hidden experimental trials where dangerous HIV drugs were used on New York City orphans. Liam is co-host with Robert Scott Bell's program on health and has been a publisher and published in the New York Press, City, the LA City Beat, Salvo, and others. Also rounding our panel today will be Clark Baker. He is a former officer of the Los Angeles Police Department. He left after retirement in 2000 to become an independent private investigator. He is now the founder of the Office of Medical and Scientific Justice in Southern California, which spearheads investigations into the politics and fraud of various medical-related groups and individuals, including the pro-AIDS industry and academia. Now, first, my overarching concern. Virtually the entire medical community, that means the AMA, the American Academy of Pediatrics, virtually all 12 major medical organizations, almost all of the American scientific and worldwide scientific community, the major publications such as The Lancet, Nature, the New England Journal of Medicine, the Journal of the American Medical Association, the Journal of Infectious Disease, the FDA, the CDC, the National Cancer Institute, and the National Institute for Allergies and Infections all agree upon one thing. HIV by itself is capable of causing you to die from any one of 30 single or combined conditions that they call AIDS, defining illnesses. You will only be able to know if you have AIDS if you take an HIV antibody test. If the test is positive, and if it's reaffirmed through the Western blot and ELISA test, then you will die. Originally, you were going to die quickly, but now they say you can live years with the infection, providing that you get on an aggressive antiretroviral cocktail. Frequently DDI, DDC, AZT combinations, protease inhibitors. There are hundreds of companies in the war on AIDS. We are also told that AIDS is unique and that we can all be infected with it. It is sexually transmitted. But to date, anyone who has challenged any of these absolutely standard answers to the question of AIDS is called pseudoscientific, an AIDS denier. There's been $800 billion pumped into the war on AIDS. There are no cures from their side. There's no vaccines, even though there's been nearly 70 trials. And all their promising drugs, including the latest drug, which it was just revealed this past week, for people taking it, especially women, to prevent HIV infection, it didn't work. Instead of blaming the drug, they simply said that probably most women weren't compliant in taking the drug. There has been no official challenge to any of the things I've just said. However, all of my guests will spend this hour in official challenge. But we're going to begin today with a person who was one of the very first scientists to take on the AIDS community. It's one thing when you're a lay person or concerned journalist or an activist. It's something else when you're a Nobel Prize winner. Your Nobel Prize was in chemistry for the PCR, the polymerase chain reaction, which was used in the war on AIDS. But Dr. Kary Mullis had the courage when he saw that what people were calling AIDS and how we were told to diagnose it and treat it simply didn't add up. I went to California to interview at his home, right across the street from the beach, Dr. Kary Mullis on these inconsistencies. At that time, there were only a handful, no more than 4 or 5 scientists willing to go on the record officially that there was a problem. Today, there's nearly 3,000, and he is not the only Nobel Prize winner. There are Nobel Prize winners, professors emeritus, which is the highest academic standing, people who have achieved such a high standard in virology, molecular biology, immunology, that they're recognized by their peers. Individually, each of these people have published from dozens to hundreds of articles. Collectively, you're talking about well over 100,000 articles they've published in peer-reviewed journals. They've held the highest academic positions, and yet they all have something in common. The moment they look for the truth, which they thought was self-evident, they never questioned the HIV equals AIDS equals death hypothesis, they were immediately warned by their colleagues when they still went forward with what they considered the truth that we've been lied to about everything on AIDS. They were ostracized. They were condemned. Research money dried up. Participation in scientific activities and lecturing invitations went away. In effect, they became persona non grata. So the question is, if we could do this to nearly 3,000 of the greatest scientists, physicians, and journalists in the world, and they came from all countries, what does it tell us about the politics of science, the power of the pharmaceutical industry, and its control over our regulatory agencies? We're going to watch and listen to a part of this interview right now with Dr. Kary Mullis, Nobel Prize winner in chemistry, dealing with HIV. It's 5 minutes, and then we will go to our first panelist, Celia Farber. Later in the program, you'll be hearing and watching John Verapin, former Vice President of Marketing, a PhD for Eli Lilly, and he will talk about how he became a person who bribed people in governments like the Swedish government, knew the truth about how bad these chemicals being used were, and how he got away with it, and how all pharmacy, big companies get away with it, killing people, and how they close ranks to prevent you, or me, or others from telling the truth. His is a cautionary tale. Let's go to Dr. Kary Mullis now. California microbiologist Dr. Kary Mullis was awarded the Nobel Prize in 1993 for his development of one of the most widely used current techniques in molecular biology today, the PCR, or polymerase chain reaction. This revolutionary technique allows scientists to take a sample containing a very minute amount of DNA and replicate that DNA sequence until there are many copies. One of the first applications of PCR was to analyze human tissue for the presence of HIV.
PCR is commonly used in medical and biological research labs for the detection of virus culture in infectious persons.
The people that are AIDS researchers now are getting neurotic if you ask them any questions. There was a time when I first started asking questions, all I wanted was, where are the papers? Just tell me the papers that you read that convinced you that HIV was the cause of AIDS, because I need to reference those papers in some of the, I was working on a test for HIV with PCR, and I needed to write a little report to the NIH and say, here's the progress we've made, and the first line of it was, HIV is the probable cause of AIDS. And I thought that was true. This is before I got involved. And I said, what's the reference for that quote? And I looked for it for about 2 or 3 years, and I never could find it. And by the end of 2 years, I'd ask everybody at every meeting that I'd gone to that talked about AIDS, I'd ask, you know, I'd look through every computer database. There is no reference. There is nobody who should get credit for that statement. Now that's a pretty weird situation in science, where getting credit for a discovery is the most important thing in your life as a scientist.
It's not just Peter Duisberg or some outsiders who criticize the failure of our war against AIDS. It's the orthodoxy itself. They advertise they have not saved one single life. That means, in conventional scientific logic, there could very well be something profoundly wrong with the basic hypothesis, with the basic approach that we use against AIDS.
It wasn't a plot, it wasn't even greed or anything like that. It was a mistake in certain circumstances that happened, but the failure has been that science failed to correct that error. Subsequently, it's had plenty of opportunity to do that, but the whole kind of bandwagon that got rolling.
This year, an estimated 40,000 individuals in the United States and almost 6 million people worldwide will become infected with HIV.
With all the feeling associated with it, the compassion for AIDS patients, the fear of what was happening as this purported virus was thought to be spreading sexually in the world's populations. That feeling, that emotion, stopped science from following its normal checks and balances and putting right this fundamental mistake.
After 20 years of research, with nothing on the vaccine horizon, pretty inconsistent treatments, and no actual mechanism by which we are to understand this tiny little piece of genetic material causes the complete collapse of the immune system, I think it's high time that we started looking at other alternatives. Not to say that HIV has nothing to do with AIDS, but there probably is something going on, and some of the biggest minds in AIDS science are beginning to suspect this as well.
This is Stonewall. This is where it began. June 28, 1969. 8 New York City police officers showed up here. They came to do what they had done dozens of times, arrest and harass gays. A major confrontation ensued. Within 2 hours, there were nearly 2,000 gays in the street and 400 New York City police. The New York City police realized that it could no longer arbitrarily and capriciously harass and attack individuals who were simply choosing to honor their own lifestyle. This was the beginning of gay liberation. It was also the beginning of the sexual revolution within the gay community. And within the next few years, hundreds of clubs like Stonewall would open throughout New York, Los Angeles, and San Francisco.
From the mid-1970s until 1984, when the so-called official cause of AIDS was announced to the world, many individuals in the gay community were suffering from a unique form of diseases that baffled scientists. The original theory was that living an unhealthy lifestyle, including the use of poppers or amyl nitrate and unsafe anal intercourse, were the causes of AIDS.
After years of struggling for their sexual predisposition to be accepted by society, with the whole gay lib movement and everything that stood for, here was what was at first called a gay plague by the US administration in the early 80s. They were more or less saying, we wash our hands of this. And that presented a very big threat to these guys, because they knew that their friends were dying, that there was a genuine new syndrome there, and the government was seemingly not showing much interest.
The name was suggested for that disease, to name it gay-related immune deficiency, grid. So it was strictly associated with the fact that these 5 initial patients were homosexuals. That created an extremely passionate reaction from the gay community that regarded as totally intolerable that such a discrimination was pointing at their lifestyle and the disease.
AIDS was first identified among gay men in 1981 who practiced certain lifestyle behaviors. They, according to New York Times, on July 3rd, 1981, tended to have upwards of 2,000 sexual contacts a year and used a lot of aphrodisiacal drugs, including poppers, amyl nitrite, a very dangerous substance that gay men had been inhaling in epidemic proportions since the early 1970s. And with regard to the sexual activity, you don't need to be moralistic to say that, gosh, you have 2,000 sex partners a year, you develop a laundry list of infectious diseases, venereal diseases, that can do a lot of damage over the long term to your immune system. Doctors and scientists looking at this phenomenon early on said, gosh, they do a lot of drugs, they have a laundry list of venereal diseases. The combination of these factors might well be enough to knock their immune systems for a real loop.
That's just some of the information from this particular documentary, AIDS Inc. And we will now go in studio here to Celia Farber. I gave you her introduction. Hi, Celia.
Hi, Gary.
Now, Celia, we've been told that everyone is equally susceptible to AIDS, the 30 conditions we call AIDS. We're told that only the antibody test will tell us accurately if we have it, and if we do, then we should immediately get on the antiretrovirals. You've been researching this for over 20 years. Tell us what your research shows us as of today. What is the state of our knowledge about AIDS, and where does the official story differ from what you and independents and all the individuals in this program we just saw to date? They're all qualified scientists or journalists. They're having a different point of view. Bring us up to date.
What the media doesn't tell us ever and will never admit. First of all, what I've been saying in my work for over 20 years, that there is a vast body, as you have reported so much yourself, a vast body of high-level researchers who have contested this hypothesis from the outset, pretty much from the outset, from 1987. So that's the one issue. It is not true that nobody disagrees. It is not true that the theory stands uncontested. In terms of what you pick up from just following the story on the street, more and more and more, you hear of people who have tested, who have been positive for 20 years, 25 years and more, and are I don't want to use the phrase perfectly healthy, because an HIV antibody test does seem to be an indication of something, and there's just tremendous discussion online and elsewhere about what exactly it means. It is certainly not a death sentence. It is certainly not a clock that's ticking, and they certainly had no right ever to issue this terrible. It's really a curse, to have come out and said, if you test positive, you're going to die, because it's far from the truth.
All right, we've been told that everyone is equally susceptible. In that we're all equally susceptible, why have we not seen the average healthy American infected? Why have we not seen the average healthy gay person, the average healthy heterosexual? Why haven't we seen older people or younger people? And if it's sexually transmitted, why haven't we seen a same correlation between sexually transmitted disease, syphilis, gonorrhea, herpes, hepatitis, that we see in young people using unprotected sex, and those are also pregnant, and AIDS? We have not seen that same correlation. It's still confined to 3 primary groups. Why haven't the media been able to challenge just that alone?
Okay, I have actually a bombshell report to address that, but first let me say something a little bit broader. In terms of what happened in 1984, as you're well aware, in 1984 they had sick people, very sick people. They had a cohort of very sick gay men who had whatever they had in common. We can't deal with that right here and right now, but it began with sick people. Then they had a viral hypothesis. Then they developed an antibody test. And then they flipped it the other way, so that you're healthy and you are instilled with fear through the propaganda. You are asked to get tested, and then you are asked whether you believe you're going to get sick, intend to get sick, intend to go on medications. So one of the things that I've realized recently is this is just like the economic system. This is the first debt-based disease. You are asked to be indebted to your illness and to your symptomology before you are sick. So we can't have a simultaneous conversation about what happened then and what those people had. In other words, what you're calling it, what we all call it. How do we cut this out of time and space before and after? Has it happened yet? Might it happen in the future? We're lost in projections, finances, technological mumbo jumbo here. Would you like me to get to the bombshell?
Yes, please.
Okay. I have recently begun to dig around WikiLeaks, a fantastic resource that I wish I had begun to read sooner. And I plugged in HIV/AIDS, as you might imagine. Came up with a cable. WikiLeaks is decontextualized, so I would like your help. Let's figure out what this might mean. The origin is the Secretary of State of the United States. The date is Wednesday, December 16th, 2009. Status unclassified, WikiLeaks. What this is about is the subject, HIV Final Rule State. Now I'm going to read. The Department of Health and Human Services, Centers for Disease Control, HHS, published November 2nd, that the Federal Register will remove HIV infection from the list of communicable diseases of public health significance and remove references to HIV from the scope of medical examinations for aliens. Final rule will go into effect on January 4th, 2010. And I've highlighted a quote, this is a long cable, that just absolutely jumped out at me, and let's figure out what this might mean. Quote, the CDC determined that while HIV infection is a serious health condition, it is not a communicable disease that is a significant public health risk for introduction, transmission, and spread through casual contact. We refer you to the CDC for further guidance.
What do I make of that? That historically the CDC and the National Cancer Institute let it be known, rather dramatically, that everyone was equally susceptible and that it was infectious. Hence, remember the paranoia about you couldn't even hug a person, a parent couldn't hug their child, a husband who was infected couldn't hug or kiss the wife. Or
complete terror.
That is now shown with this cable to be not true. We've known it's not true. For example, Magic Johnson and Arthur Ashe. Both were claimed to be HIV positive. Both were claimed to have AIDS, not just HIV infection. And yet, look at all of the spouses, male or female, none of those have come down with AIDS.
That's right.
Nor have their children come down with AIDS.
That's right.
Even after
repeated. It's not in
the
porn industry. It's not in the
That's correct. And the porn industry would be the first place with all the unprotected sex that you would see it. You haven't.
That's right. There's no correlation between more sex and more HIV. There just isn't. There never has been.
But if they made an honest statement that HIV is not going to be easily to contact, that we're not going to get AIDS-defining illnesses through the normal way that we deal with each other, then all that money that we spend each year would go away. The power that the AIDS community, the AIDS organizations like ACT UP have, their ability to work at every single AIDS conference. And who do you see at these AIDS conferences? Hand-picked scientists that never challenge the HIV equals AIDS equals death hypothesis, and then go outside and all you see is hundreds of booths with pharmaceutical agents and their lobbyists saying, here's the latest drug. And almost always you'll see most of the AIDS or gay foundations there promoting this, because that's who gives them their money to be financed. We've never been honest in the United States about AIDS, and this is just one example, but it's a secret that came forward. We have to know this out of WikiLeaks. Right. We were never told this by the Secretary of State, because had they done that, overnight AIDS funding would have dried up. Now ask yourself, what is the #1 cause of death in people with AIDS? Is it any of the 30 conditions known to be called AIDS?
I don't know what AIDS is anymore.
Okay, well let's say it's pneumocystis carinii pneumonia. Let's say it's Kaposi sarcoma, dementia, thrush. None of those. None of the 30 defined illnesses collectively called AIDS is the primary cause of death in people diagnosed with AIDS. It's liver failure.
Right, from the drugs, yeah.
From the drugs only.
Yeah.
So what if you had to say that the number one reason people who are being treated for AIDS die is because of the treatment? Well, how many people want to undergo the treatment?
Well, they would say, oh, many, many more people. Everybody was dying, and it's only since the drugs came in the mid-90s that there's any survival at all.
They would not be accurate nor honest at that time.
That's right, but that's the propaganda, and it's written on the tablet that way. And
if it's a gay disease, why weren't the healthy, non-fast-track gays who are not doing immunitrite, not doing ecstasy and cocaine, and not staying up all night, not having multiple sexual partners and coming down with multiple cases in a given year? I interviewed over 2,700 people on Christopher Street, on Fire Island. I went to the gay communities in Castro Street in San Francisco, the 3 epicenters. Why is it in the United States we only found AIDS in 3 specific areas of the United States? If it was communicable, it would have been everywhere. You'd have found it on a farm in Utah.
You know what they
but we
say?
didn't.
They say, oh, it's communicable in Africa, and it's
Okay,
that's
fine. Let's say they're right.
Racist end of the propaganda.
Then we looked at every single country in Africa. And we compared the number of people living in that country and the number of people who were considered defined by symptoms only as having AIDS. They only were able to find AIDS in any statistically significant number where there was massive starvation, schistosomiasis, people drinking infected water, people had multiple cases of malaria, people who are living in refugee camps where there's a high degree of tuberculosis. And look at the signs of tuberculosis. They're virtually identical. But
I know what you're saying, exactly.
But let's go down to South Africa.
Right.
Let's go down to where we were told that the most cases of AIDS in Africa were. If you go down to South Africa, indeed you find a lot of people who had immune-related illnesses, but they were the poor people who were living under apartheid, who when apartheid ended, their living conditions did not improve. However, show me the cases of AIDS in the mercantile class, in the professional class, lawyers, doctors, engineers, professors, CPAs, in the people who own their own businesses, in the bureaucrats, the police officers, the firefighters, the school teachers, the mechanics. You won't.
No, it's
so you mean this virus is so good that it knows not to infect you based upon if you're still black in Africa, it won't infect you, but if you're a poor person living 2 miles away across the trailings of the gold fields, then you get infected.
Yeah, I mean, it has white supremacist elements to it, this hypothesis. And
it's a purely racist disease. All right?
But this is a hypothesis that is loved by the liberal left.
Yes.
You know that better than anybody.
I know.
This whole situation is utterly baffling.
I have been attacked on my own radio station by producers who will be the first to line up to give their children a vaccine, the first to accept anything the scientific and medical community, the first to give their children teen screen, the first to accept that social anxiety disorder or authority defiance disorder are legitimate.
Right.
And I've never seen such culpably arrogant and ignorant individuals as the official left. They're an embarrassment when it comes to anything that's healthy.
Totally agree with you. So what are we going to do? How is this bubble ever going, how is this disaster ever going to be sorted out? Let's say, in other words, okay, so here we have it. They are essentially saying, what is that saying? Let's just be as absolutely fair as we can to the U.S.
It's
government.
not infectious.
It's not that's right. It's not a disease the CDC determined that while HIV infection is a serious health condition, that's murky right there, but it is not a communicable disease that is a significant public health risk.
Then how in the world can they say that it's sexually transmitted when more individuals are going to get diseases by sexual contact, whether it's herpes or gonorrhea or papillomavirus, and yet exclude now the communicable aspect of AIDS from that?
Well, I mean, what we need to get is a source from the U.S. government to address this. I just found this.
Well, Celia, let's go over to our panelists, and let's say hello now to Liam Schaaf, who is standing by, an investigative journalist. Liam, nice to have you with us.
Yo, Gary, am I coming in? I'm calling from California.
Okay, nice to have you with us on the phone. Now, Liam, you've been listening to what we've been talking about here in our studio in New York City. Take us step by step through what you believe the American public needs to know about the real causes of AIDS, the real diagnostics of AIDS, and the real treatment of AIDS, if we're to better educate the American public, at least those who are open enough to accept the legitimacy that there is a reasonable criteria for those of us who've challenged AIDS.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So Celia, you found a WikiLeaks that says, I want this to go up on the Facebook today. I want people to get this. HIV is not a disease of significant value as a communicable problem. Don't look at it anymore.
Merry Christmas, Liam.
Yeah. Happy New Year. Gary, your question is, the answer to the question is do what all the college students do. They just totally ignore it. I mean, there's this myth, wild myth, that people wear condoms or worry about this kind of thing. You know, look at any real statistical evaluation of people's sex lives. Nobody ever really cared. They target the gay community, the so-called black community, or children of the African diaspora. They target these targeted communities for testing. Tests come up positive for everything. These people already have reasons for being sick, but you know why people got sick in the beginning, because you were there and you actually did interventions with people to get them better. But unfortunately, the gay community acts like a very frightened bunch of children, and you can quote me on that, who don't want to take responsibility for themselves, including the fact that they let the AIDS machine kill about 100 to 150,000 gay men between 87 and 95 with AZT. And Celia knows all about that. She wrote about that long before I got involved with it. I mean, you guys have covered the ground historically. You watch these medical monsters poisoning people, and you watch the gay community going, help us, you're killing us, but don't make any corrections in our lifestyle. Now let me be clear about what I mean by lifestyle, because I'm very gay positive, gay friendly. I'm talking about what happened in the bathhouses in the 1970s, after Stonewall, after sexual revolution. The thing that I've had to understand, and I had to ask myself the question, was, why did this happen to young gay men? The Africa problem you already covered, totally political. They just threw a red paint all over Africa and said, oh, the people who were starving to death for the 400 years of slavery and the colonial wars afterward, those people, they're sick. Don't worry about the dirty water that they have to walk 2 miles to get. No. Don't worry about the guns pointed at their heads by Idi Amin and other British intelligence officers and American intelligence officers. Don't worry. They had sex once. That's their problem. So the New York Times and all the idiot branch of I'm very freedom loving, so I'm liberal, but there's something that happened to liberalism, and I don't know what it is. But they want to circumcise every guy with a skin tone darker than Harry Belafonte, as long as he doesn't speak very well. I don't know, like, as long as they don't speak English, circumcise them all. So that's Africa. That's just some weird eugenic mindset. What happened in the gay community was that these guys weren't only doing the drugs that Duesberg was talking about, they were doing antibiotics every day. Antibiotics destroy your intestine. Then they were going and doing these things. Now, a great researcher, independent researcher called Tony Lance pointed this out to me. He said, hey, you should look at this. He pointed out to everybody in a paper he wrote called The Gut Instinct on AIDS. These guys were taking the municipal tap water, and they'd put a big shower hose up to it and put like a 10-inch, this is a little graphic, but put a 10-inch, I don't know, kind of a dildo looking thing, a douching rod, and they'd blow the municipal tap water up through their colon, strip the epithelial lining of their colon. If you think I'm kidding, it's called a shower shot, and you can buy it on Amazon.com for $50, though I don't recommend you use it the way that it's intended to be used. You do this to prepare yourself for sex or fisting, because if you're doing methamphetamines, you're going to get into wilder and wilder, more dangerous kinds of colon tearing sex. I look, again, very sex positive, and I think you could have anal sex with your partner with a non-toxic natural lubricant in a very gentle, relatively gentle or loving way and not tear your guts apart. But I'll tell you what happened. They said, you 10 guys, let's go in this room and I'll be the receptive end. And if this is too graphic for you, the audience, if this is too graphic for you, then stop caring about the AIDS thing at all because you don't understand it. I'm so tired of liberals going, I care about AIDS, let's circumcise black men and let's put drugs into women in Africa. And you don't have the guts to hear about the terrible decimation of the gut, the internal flora, which actually led to white blood cell decline, T cell decline. Now the brilliant mainstream says that 80% or more of your functional immune system lives where? In your intestine. And when you destroy your intestine, you do not signal the creation of white blood cells. Duh, you do not make T cells. I think that we found a theory here that actually matches the reality. What do you think? I'll just throw it back. I don't want to talk through the whole thing.
Celia?
I totally agree with you, Liam. Tony Lance introduced me to his work a few years ago, and we actually met, and he said, I think I've found the cause of AIDS, Celia, and he described what Liam just described, and as soon as he said it, I felt like that. The first thing he said was, I think everybody has been somewhat right and somewhat wrong. I think the dissidents have been a lot more right than the orthodoxy, but they've been missing a piece, and I think I have found the piece. And when he described that piece, I said, oh my God, that's it. That's it. And there is a 100% correlation between leaky gut syndrome, as it's called, or compromised gut, and a progression of illness. 100%.
When I had spoken originally with a member of the New York health community, downtown, one of the leaders of the AIDS health community, I asked him, have you come down to Christopher Street? No, not yet. Has anyone, to your knowledge, from the New York Times spent time down on Christopher Street? What do you mean time? 6 or 7 hours a night, 7 nights a week, for a year or two. Well, no one's going to do that. How are you going to know the cause of something unless you're willing to give it that kind of commitment? So I spent that time on Christopher Street. I can't tell you until you're there to see for yourself. One man was having 20 to 30 sexual partners a night. He would go in and there would be a bowl on a counter filled with 500 milligrams of penicillin. He would take a handful of those. I said, you realize that penicillin knocks out your immune system, destroys the good bacteria in your gut, leading to malabsorption syndrome, or maybe that's why I have diarrhea. Also, when you're receiving anal intercourse, and you have ejaculate material that's immunosuppressive in your anus. Also, you're ripping the anus, which is very sensitive. The anus is not a vagina. The tissue is different, and that allows fecal material to go from your anus into your bloodstream, creating all forms of sepsis conditions. And the person kind of looked at me, and then about a week later, I took down 4 scientific papers showing that amyl nitrate, the poppers, and that's how he could have so many sexual experiences. They're called dry orgasms. A person is not sexually aroused because they've already depleted their chi, so they break an amyl nitrate under their nose, and suddenly for about 5 to 10 seconds, they get this little rush. And I showed them that amyl nitrate was a common condition causing Kaposi sarcoma. And later, after I'd seen all this happening, then I compared that to a group of healthy gays. I asked my audience, who were gay men and women, to come to a lecture. There were almost 1,000. I asked, how many in here have a lot of sex? All the hands went up. I said, how many in here do drugs, amyl nitrate, alcohol, smoke, drink? None did. How many of you tested positive? They did not. So it was clear to me that being gay was not the issue. It was the sexual preference of those called the fast tracks. And by the way, at the very same time I was counseling couples who were engaged in the swinging community, who were engaged using amyl nitrate, and they were coming down with AIDS-defining illnesses that the media completely overlooked. Because then you're going to have to say, well, which couples and what were they doing? It was the activity, the drugs they were taking. They'd go, they'd be smoking and drinking and taking these drugs, and also cocaine. And if you went to Plato's Retreat and a lot of the different swing clubs, you'd see people who It wasn't the sex that caused it, it was how they were having the sex. Sex doesn't cause disease. Unprotected sex can, and taking other things destroy your immune system. So remember, when they're checking T cells, they're not checking your overall immune response. I took 100 marathoners who were all vegan, never took drugs, never drank, smoked, were all very healthy, were a week before the marathon. Their T cells were under 200 because, yes, all of them. That meant that just training for a marathon was enough to drop them into what would be considered an AIDS diagnosed condition if you had under 200 T cells and had any symptoms. Well, this year, a week before the New York City Marathon, go into Central Park and ask how many people, how many of you have chest pains and are colds, how many have flu-like symptoms, how many of you have problems with digestion. Many of them will. But 2 weeks after that, we tested again the blood, the T cells and the immune system rebounded and they came right back up. I work with over 1,000 people at the Tri-State Healing Center who had full-blown AIDS. I asked a group of them, are you willing to undergo a rigorous, holistic, immune-modulating protocol? 12 individuals said yes. Over a 16-month period, all 12 of those individuals reversed their AIDS-defining illnesses, even when HIV negative. Those individuals went on Tony Brown's journal. He heard about it with their medical records, their original diagnostics, to show that this had happened. Why did no one in the mainstream media covered it? We even had a press conference, invited all the media, no one showed up. Why? Because if they had to acknowledge that individuals, and by the way, they all had something in common. They were all previously drug users, including getting infections. So what they were calling HIV, today I would say that they had herpes 6 or hepatitis. Their immune system was recognizing that it was defective and they were picking up this on the very inaccurate test. Now, Lynn, last question at this moment. Tell us why the HIV antibody test, which was originally patented by Robert Gallo, why that is not a scientifically valid test, and yet that has been the cornerstone of diagnosis throughout the United States and Europe.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite bedtime stories. There was a guy called Robert Gallo, and he was in a group of guys who were funded through Richard Nixon's war on cancer, and they were going to prove that a virus caused cancer. They never could do it. So what he did was he made protein tests. So he had this thing, HTLV1, and he made a protein test, and some 1/1,000,000% of people who tested positive on his make-believe protein test ever got sick, but he said that the test was good and the disease was real. So he was pretty phony. He said he had another cancer virus. He called it HL23V. You don't have to remember that, but he was accused of by his peers, including Robin Weiss, who's now an AIDS muckety-muck, of mixing together 3 samples from different monkeys. So he was accused of fraud, but he said, whoops, it was an accident. I didn't mean to mix them together. Then the gay guys are getting sick, and he says, oh, it must be one of my cancer viruses that doesn't cause cancer. I got to make a test for that. So if he was accused of mixing together 3 monkey things and that was considered fraudulent, I guess he'd never do that again. But what happens is he mixes together 10 serum samples from 10 different patients. This is on the record, on the books. He calls proteins out of them. They have a molecular weight. This is really voodoo stuff. You can't hold these things in your hand. You push them through agar gel or spin them in some kind of sucrose gradient, and you say that if they're at this band, they weigh this much, but you never hold them in your hand. You don't really know what they weigh. And then he said there were some proteins from some of these 10 guys that he mixed together with a batch of cancer cells that came from the previous experiments. These proteins, by the way, have the same molecular weight as proteins in your body, like actin and myosin, which is what you're made of. And then he took those proteins and said, oh, these are for my new virus, HTLV3, which nobody could say, so they branded it, because it was the 80s, we need a new brand, and they put HIV on it, which just rolls off the tongue. He sold that to Abbott Laboratories for some undisclosed amount of money. I bet it was $1 million, and he's getting tens of thousands a year. You probably know better than I, maybe 100,000 a year. That test, those proteins from the 10 dudes mixed together with the cancer cells that came from the previous experiment that didn't make anything, that didn't prove anything, that's an HIV test. I'm not kidding. That rigmarole is an HIV test.
Yeah.
Now, Abbott Laboratories, because there are lawyers who work at that company,
Amazing.
the lawyers went to the guys trying to sell the test and said, here, put this in the test. Under limitations of the test, it says, warning, limitation, this test, it says, at present, there is no recognized standard for determining the absence or presence of HIV in human blood, or antibodies to HIV in human blood. One more time, this test shows we have no recognized standard for determining the absence, not having, or the presence of HIV. What's the test called? An HIV test. They can get away with it because in America you can lie on the front of the cereal box, but then you have to have a warnings and limitations that nobody reads. To this day, we're 30 years on, just about 28 years on from the patenting of the test, that's what the test says still. The test in the medical literature come up positive in pregnant women, you name the disease, tuberculosis, malaria, alcoholic liver disease, vaccination. My favorite is in mice and dogs. They come up positive in mice and dogs. And in the medical literature, it says this is surprising because the mice were not exposed to HIV. Well, I guess maybe nobody else was either. I hope that suffices for an answer, and I wasn't laughing too much. There's a line that goes, first as a tragedy and then as a farce, and for me, the whole thing lives in the realm of farce at this point.
Leon, you also have to examine that you can have cancer in dogs and cats and horses and fish. You can have immune defective illnesses across the board. They've never been able to have an animal model like chimpanzees where they could show that AIDS developed, even when they use chemotherapy and radiation and toxic drugs to first suppress the immune system to try to get them infected. I consider it one of the greatest medical frauds, but perfectly committed crime against humanity. And I believe that all these people, and especially those people who are the truth deniers, which are all these individuals, these radical groups, I believe that they should all be held accountable for crimes against humanity. I believe that we will not be able to change anything going on because it's official, the fix is in, and it's not going to change. At some point 20, 30 years from now, we will look back and say, how were so many people, especially the so-called brilliant ones, the liberals, how were they caught up in this hysteria and refused to recognize it? Now, we're going to go to Clark Baker in a second, but here are a few of the 3,000 scientists, journalists, and physicians who challenge it. This is from Professor David Raznick in biochemistry, protease inhibitor developer, and he actually developed the protease drugs that are used in AIDS. Quote, as a scientist who has studied AIDS for over 2 decades, I have determined that AIDS has little to do with science and is not even primarily a medical issue. AIDS is a sociological phenomenon held together by fear, creating the kind of medical McCarthyism that has transgressed and collapsed all the rules of science and has imposed a brief pseudoscience on the vulnerable public. This is from Dr. David Miller from Harvard, medical doctor, and also from the University of Washington School of Medicine. And he says, AIDS is a government-defined disease. The CDC and government-funded investigators accept as fact the supposition that HIV causes AIDS and is sexually transmitted. This is not to be questioned, but this HIV/AIDS model does not jibe with the true facts of the matter. Only 1 in 1,000 unprotected sexual contacts transmits HIV, and only 1 in 275 U.S. citizens has antibodies to this virus. Consequently, the average uninfected person would need to have 275,000 random unprotected sexual contacts to acquire sexually transmitted HIV. This is from Tony Brown, who also is a journalist and was the founding dean of the School of Communications, Howard University. He says, the greatest threat to life in the United States and the rest of the world is not the 30 diseases called AIDS, it is the hundreds of billions of dollar aid industry composed of government, academic, medical, and industrial interests in the United States. I've concluded that AIDS is a scientifically dishonest construct and exemplified in the death of my friend Arthur Ashe, The lies that we have been told make it all the more deadly. And by the way, I appeared with Arthur Ashe on Tony Brown's Journal. Arthur Ashe came over day after day, sometimes all day on Saturday, sitting in a room with all these people who are getting better, using holistic protocols, rebuilding their immune system, rebuilding their gut, helping get rid of local focal infections, helping them also with mind-body approaches. And I said, Arthur, what are you afraid of? You've seen their medical records. You've spoken with them. You've spoken with the medical doctors and the staff. You see they're getting better. Why are you opposed to this? He said, this is what he said to me. He said, I'm afraid of what my doctor will say to me.
Wow.
All right? That is what Arthur Ashe said. Now, from Dr. Rebecca Colshaw, Assistant Professor of Mathematics, University of Texas, quote, and she was the advisor of the Journal of Biological Systems and studied and published mathematical models of HIV infection for 10 years until she looked for the truth. Here's what she said. HIV tests are meaningless. A person can react positive even though he or she is not infected with HIV. The tests are interpreted differently in different countries, which means that a person who is HIV positive in Africa or Thailand can be negative when tested in Australia. There is no justification for the fact that most people have not been informed about the serious inaccuracies of the test. The error has catastrophic repercussions on thousands of people. Since people are reacting positive on tests that are not specific for HIV, let's help stop labeling them as HIV positive. And this is from medical doctor, Dr. Robert DiPrato. Diagnosis of HIV infection is based almost entirely upon detection of antibodies to HIV, but there can be misleading cross-reactions between HIV-1 antigens and antibodies formed against other antigens. And these may lead to false positive reactions. Thus, it is impossible to relate any antibody response specifically to HIV infection. This is from the director of the Virus Research Laboratory, the Public Health Laboratory Service, Dr. Philip Mortimer. Quote, HIV cannot be responsible for AIDS. After 3 years of intensive critical studies of the relevant scientific literature and as an experienced virologist and molecular biologist, I came to the following surprising conclusion. There's actually no single scientific reality convincing evidence for the existence of HIV, nor even once has such a retrovirus been isolated and purified by the methods of classical virology. From Dr. Hans Ludwig Sanger, Professor Emeritus of Molecular Biology at the Max Planck Institute for Biochemistry, I believe that HIV does not exist. I believe that there are several factors that break down the immune system. For over 20 years of fighting the AIDS establishment, I have come to realize that greed and corruption at the highest levels, even in government, propels all of them, that the media unwittingly have convinced and connived with them to terrorize the people. I give out $50,000 to any wonderful virologist who will prove the existence of HIV according to the original papers by Robert Gallo, Dr. Luc Montagnier. And finally, MD, PhD, Dr. Paul Ojea, Medical Director in Lagos, Nigeria. It's not even probable, let alone scientifically proven, that HIV causes AIDS. If there is evidence that HIV causes AIDS, there should be scientific documents which either in single or collective demonstrate that fact, at least with a high probability. There are no such documents. Years from now, people will find our acceptance of the HIV theory of AIDS as silly as we find those who excommunicated Galileo. Now, we have 3,000 individuals, scientists, journalists, and physicians. These are critical thinkers. These are some of the best minds in the world. And as I said at the beginning of the program, collectively they published over 100,000 papers in peer-reviewed journals. How could 3,000 individuals with over 100,000 published papers, all of them have got it absolutely wrong about AIDS? It's because they didn't get it wrong about AIDS. It's because the millions of people who get the money, the prestige, the awards, the funding for going along with the paradigm and no longer are critical in their thinking and refuse to look for the truth, they're the ones who are on the wrong side of history. Let's now go over and say hello to Clark Baker. Clark, nice to have you with us.
Hey, thanks for having me, and I'm honored to be among your guests.
Clark, we don't have a lot of time, but I'd like for you to tell us what are the points that you're most concerned with that you would like to offer a challenge to.
Well, I distilled the issues that you brought up in your show today to one question that any of your listeners can ask for themselves to try this out. When, where, why, what, and who proved that HIV attacks cells and causes AIDS? I asked the NIH, I asked the CDC, and they simply transferred me to third-party websites that the CDC and NIH websites tell or warn in their disclaimer not to trust. So because the NIH and CDC refused to answer my questions, I created OMSJ, and I started the HIV Innocence Group, which forces, we get involved in HIV-related criminal cases so that we can compel prosecution expert HIV expert witnesses to testify under oath, under penalty of perjury, about the things that the CDC and the NIH refuse to declare or admit. And as a result of that, in the last 2 years and 5 months or so, we've forced prosecutors to drop or plea bargain, significantly plea bargain, 39 cases around the United States. Our last case, we simply looked at the medical records and prepared an affidavit. Based on that affidavit, the defense attorney approached the prosecutor and said, this is what we have in our basket. If you go to trial, OMSJ will bring their team over and kick your butt. And because of that, the prosecutor dismissed all the charges. That was just about a week or two ago in Tennessee.
Clark, have you ever seen any of the mainstream pro-AIDS gurus, Robert Gallo and the others, sit down to a national debate with any of the leading challengers of the HIV equals AIDS hypothesis? No.
In fact, I would welcome the chance of getting Robert Gallo or Tony Fauci or any of these leading global HIV experts to testify on the stand. You would think that after 32 years as the world's most existential threat to humanity, that one of these experts would testify as an expert in an HIV criminal case. And when you bring them into the courtroom, or if you compel one of these experts to come into the courtroom, these people recoil like vampires in church.
Well, for a simple reason. You're able to question them under oath, and you're also able to do depositions, and those depositions are then on the record, and a person who lies, if they would lie, are held to a legal standard of perjury. I'm concerned about this. I want to invite any pro-HIV equals AIDS equals death, protease inhibitors or drugs are good for you, the test is accurate. I'm inviting you to a debate. You're invited to come on this program, debate myself, Celia Farber, or any group of scientists. If you're a medical doctor or PhD, let us have a panel. We will assemble some of the finest minds in the world, biologists, professors, professor emeritus, people who have the academic standing to offer challenge on our side. You on your side, bring us the best and brightest you have. Then for several hours, let us televise this worldwide. Let the American public see both sides. We've looked for the truth. I was actually supportive originally of the HIV equals AIDS equals death hypothesis until I looked for the facts and found them not true, until I looked where AIDS was happening and saw it wasn't infectious, it wasn't in the whole population, it wasn't in the partner of someone who had an immune defect. And after all, being the chief counselor at the Institute of Applied Biology with over 5,000 people who are drug addicts from Trafalgar Hospital, every one of their immune systems was completely wrecked. They had a blood that was like a sewer. Every one of those people would be HIV positive because of the cross-reactivity of what they had, hepatitis, herpes. Now, at that time, we got them healthy. We got them off the drugs. We rebuilt their immune systems. They later went on to live, as many as we could help, normal and healthy long lives. I have found that's also true with AIDS until they start using the drugs. Ask John Lawrenson, who himself is gay, a gay activist and a journalist. Ask him how many people did he know that were okay, even though they had had a hit on their immune system, until they started fast-tracking gays for put drugs on your side. That was the sign. Take AZT. And watch, after 1,500 milligrams taken throughout a day, how many of them died, and died quickly. The science shows that their hypothesis is wrong. The problem is they own the media. They own the scientific community. They own the funding. They own the establishment. So if the official word is that we're wrong and they're right, they have the power to exclude us, not debate us, because I've asked for these debates from the very beginning. And the first time I did a debate with 5 medical doctors at New York University Medical School, they were all pro-AZT. I was challenging it. Today, they were complicit in causing the unnecessary deaths of thousands of people. So I believe that where we will be called AIDS denier, we're not denying AIDS. We've never denied AIDS. We're challenging the bad science and the lethal treatments of people who have AIDS-defining illnesses. But we have been able to help people with AIDS-defining illnesses. They have not. So let them bring their science forward, and we will bring ours. And by the way, let's keep it in perspective. Why haven't we been able to spend the money on arthritis, obesity, depression, heart disease, and cancer? More money has been spent on AIDS than all those combined. Yet those are real killers, and those kill people across the board, from children to senior citizens and all others. So we've got our priorities wrong, but once you're in to a fraud, once you're into lies, you cannot possibly walk it back. Reputations to be destroyed. No one would have faith in the integrity of the oversight and peer review system, and all the people could then be legally held accountable if they knowingly proffered forward a lie that caused people to suffer and die. So we will never know the truth in our lifetimes in the mainstream media. That's the unfortunate circumstances. Give us your website, Liam.
Yeah, it is liamchef.com, but the more important one for this issue is reduce the burden. Reduce the burden, because we have to reduce the burden of these death sentences. .org.
Clark Baker, give us your website, please.
OMSJ.org, Office of Medical and Scientific Justice.
And Celia Farber?
thetruthbarrier.com, and I will be posting all this I was talking about tonight tomorrow morning.
Great.
Thetruthbarrier.com.
Also, welcome to the Progressive Radio Network.
Thank you very much.
We look forward to having you with us, and your program will be when?
Friday, March 16th, 3 p.m. Eastern Time.
We look forward to it. I'm Gary Null. Thank you all for listening and watching. We look forward to sharing more on our next program. Have a nice day, everyone.
You are listening to PRN.FM, the Progressive Radio Network.